morning. I'm delighted to be here, and what I hope to share is kind of a stream of consciousness about millions of years of history and 40 years of our practice, as it may inform this conversation about a regenerative way of thinking and design strategy. I love the notion of 2020, the year of perfect vision, and I think it's important that we do a check at a frequent basis, maybe every 5 years max, that would really evaluate where we are on this path that Ed and others have set out for us. And I'd like to look back at where we started. And I think if you look at those cave dwellings, they were doing pretty well. They were discovering habitats that achieve a lot of the things that we try to accomplish today, like biophilia and like efficiency. They didn't have issues about foreclosure in the same way that we do today. And as we advanced as a society, we became very sophisticated about how we design and built our habitat. And many of our buildings today don't perform as well as these did when they were created, including creating a sense of community. I think they were learning from the best designers surrounding them and the best builders. And then came the modern age. And so people like Corbusier and Villa Savoye talked about a machine for living. And we moved to more of a technology approach. And Rick showed you some earlier, and there are many others. Unlike Frank Lloyd Wright, who was defining biophilia before we had the term and designing to integrate ourselves into a natural system, most of the technology has been pulling us away from that idea. And when we look at the results today, all of the best examples over those years have been ignored to create a pattern that we all know too well. And in a way, with the icon of what we have today, and if you look at the facts in terms of all the indicators, everything is moving in the wrong direction with this. And the people within these homes are starting to go back to the cave idea with the man cave. And I think subconsciously they're trying to recreate what we started with. If Thomas Jefferson could come back and join us today, I don't think he would understand anything that he saw in terms of our technology, our economy, our transportation, our form of governance. Probably the only thing he would recognize are the design and construction industry. And if he were here, I think he'd say, "What the hell have you been up to? Everyone else has transformed themselves, and you're still doing what I was doing 2 centuries ago, and maybe not quite as well." And one of the things is that we haven't been allowing this powerful technology that we created to inform our designs about community and about the future. And we haven't acknowledged the fact that what we have created so far is transforming this natural capital in ways that are very disturbing and certainly not sustainable. We just heard just last week that last year's scientific projection about the ice melt in the Arctic has been exceeded by 50 years, just confirmed last week. Now, all this can be really depressing unless you accept these larger views like Dwayne Elgin's. So his belief is that this is the history of the human journey, and that in order to understand our capacity and ourselves, we have systematically separated ourselves from nature, building technology and these powerful tools. And he believes that we're at the most critical moment in human history. And we have 2 choices: to continue on the path we've been on to oblivion, which if you read the science is right about here, or change course and use our technology and use the new capacity we've created for ourselves as human beings to reintegrate ourselves with nature and to change our relationship in a way that is regenerative. Now, I want a full disclosure here. I'm not just pointing at other architects for all the evil things they've been doing. We've done a lot of houses for the rich and famous in places like this at the former tobacco farm, and even urban infill housing. They're winning lots of awards, but don't achieve any of the goals that we're all talking about here today. And we spent some time with container houses, which we're still working on a model of 30 additional designs to reuse these containers in a more appropriate way. And we have looked at our own 25-year history overlaid with the history of this green building movement to see what were the points of significant change and to try to understand how that happened and how we would try to create more of it. And when we look at that quarter of a century, what we find is the American house has become larger, more consumptive, more suburban, and less affordable than it was when we started. So you could say a lot of people are celebrating all these events, but the fact is all of it in aggregate is not good enough to step up to the demand that we now see. I would argue that USGBC and the LEED system have done more to transform the design and construction industry than anything in my professional lifetime by a factor of 3 or 4. I think that's not so true with homes. However, LEED for homes and the spin-offs that were created as a direct result of it, I think are beginning to create traction. And you can see it probably most evidenced in New Orleans at Make It Right, where we have now, I think we've completed about 100 LEED certified platinum homes and another 50 in various points in the pipeline. There are lots of good references. The solar decathlon is one of many. And when we start looking at how these structures are organized in a more holistic way, I think we can create some really interesting habitat that starts to achieve the goals that Gad and Francesca have been outlining. The passive house is now in America, alive and well, doing better with each example. This one happens to be in my community, done by a college studio, Studio 804, who do really extraordinary work. In the early 90s, when we were creating USGBC and the LEED rating system, it was obvious early on, because this was a tool built by volunteers and decisions made on a collaborative consensus basis, that even the highest level of performance, LEED Platinum, would not reach so far as to do anything positive. It would be third-party certification that you were doing less damage to the environment than everyone else, which, if you believe the science, just is totally inadequate in today's world. So the question is, a lot of the people involved in the formation of the council and LEED were involved in a NIST demonstration project in Montana. And so I started calling that level beyond doing less damage. Originally, I referred to it as plus ultra, Latin for more beyond. And as we met Janine Benyus, who lives in Bitterroot, Montana, and began working with her, it evolved to become the Living Building. As you all know, the Living Building has now grown and gotten some traction. The first building to be certified LEED Platinum and the Living Building was this project at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. It obviously generates more energy than it consumes. It purifies more water than it pollutes. In fact, in this living machine, it purifies all the water for 152 buildings on their campus. And probably more importantly, in my mind, it's the first sewage treatment plant that's been claimed by a yoga studio as their venue. And in a way, that's what we need to begin aspiring to. I think the most important part of it is it has transformed this campus and their programming and the region around it on this part of the Hudson Valley. And really, that's what we have to start thinking about as we create these new habitats, is how do they capture the imagination of the users in a way that transforms their thinking and their lifestyles and their capacity. So I'd like to look just for a moment at how we applied this at a larger scale on the University of Georgia campus in a project for the School of Ecology. Eugene Odom is arguably the father of systems thinking in this country, and we looked at his history in conservation and restoration and how he created the environmental assessment program for the government over a period of time, and how that thinking moved from there to regenerative ideas, and how that related to this industry and what we and others in the industry, like Ed and many of you, have been about. And what we think we discovered is that if this school and research center was to have any real lasting value as a change agent, as an impact, as a research and learning venue on that campus, it had to move way outside the building. And so we started looking at the entire campus in terms of inputs and outputs to understand the genius of the place. What's happening now and how does it relate to a vital future? In order to understand the biodiversity and how we might affect it in a positive way. In order to look at the various biomes in this part of the campus, it happens to be at the headwater of 2 watersheds, which is really interesting. And so we could start understanding how these had operated before settlement, how now, and how in the future. Starting with water, the most critical thing, I think, in Georgia and many other parts of our country. As we all know, the Colorado River hasn't made it to the ocean for about 10 years for a reason. And to look at the existing doctrine for water and how that might be modified by the operation of this facility and the research within it to change that pattern entirely. And the same with nutrient cycling. So assume that everything that we now call waste, like nature, is a nutrient for our human activity. And to see how that looks like if you design a system. Again, changing the old doctrine to a new doctrine. And how it might look like in practice. And organizing those principles with the design of this building and this part of the campus in a way that becomes the teacher. So the whole thing is pedagogical. Without faculty, you could be there and other students could be there and learn from this example and the research. So at this point, we have identified 9 programs that currently exist within the building that will be taught in the landscape around the building on this campus as they take on this regenerative strategy and research moving into the future. In 2006, Bill Reed created this diagram, which I think does as good a job as any and better than most to describe this long history. And so he's taking us from conventional practice not that long ago through these green strategies to more or less today. You could say, depending on who you are, where you are, maybe we're here, it's not clear. But obviously where we need to be headed is to a regenerative strategy. And so I want to focus now a little bit on what that might look like. I think it was 3 years ago that USGBC engaged us to help them create a new tool that ultimately they named a regenerative design. We were calling it generous design. But in any event, our assumption after doing some research was that we really don't need another system to measure results. What we need is a tool that will help us think differently. The idea is that this is an open source web-based tool, and that if you have a question about anything, you would go to this tool, and on your computer screen you would find this access to knowledge. And so it's divided into normal 3 sectors: social, economic, environmental, and then the 4th sector is the built environment, such as has had such a huge impact on our natural capital. And if we're going to change it, it's going to, we think, through the window of those activities. Once you enter where you are and what your issues are, then you'll notice the values of all those attributes change dramatically, because now we're dealing with the genius and the unique issues in your place. And furthermore, you start seeing the connections to all the other issues you hadn't thought about. So maybe if you are entering with a question about water, this matrix will show you the connections to all the other critical issues that water brings up, like energy and so on. And what we're finding is this is almost like acupuncture. By addressing these issues here, you get dramatic changes influencing the entire system and not just the subject of water. But you also are connected to all the best thinking and projects and resources relative to water on the planet, and you're starting to enter into a global dialogue of discovery on what kind of a future can we create. Something else we've left out a lot is biophilia. And Bill and many others worked on this book several years ago documenting what biophilic design might be. But basically, it is just reconnecting us with the rest of our reality, which is nature. We are an integral part of nature, and through Western scientific thought, we have chosen to forget that. And so remembering it and designing to restore that connection, I think, is a big part of achieving these goals that we all are aspiring to achieve. The other is biomimicry, and first of all, using it to understand the genius of the place within which we're working is the most critical issue in my mind. But having done that, using that science to also inform our choice of materials and design strategies can dramatically change the outcome. So back to housing and our work. We are at this point in time, because of the sense of urgency, we feel unwilling to deal with single-family housing any longer. And so we're really focusing on multifamily environments, and most of those are in urban centers, and most of those, like this, are in buildings that are on their third lifetime. So we're repurposing this building as housing in a very dense urban environment. This is a project that we're currently underway with. It's in what we call the green impact zone in our city. The Kansas City Star refers to it as the killing zip code for a reason. I asked Brad Pitt and Make It Right to join us here for the celebrity and the philanthropy. What you don't see behind these townhomes is a school that's been empty for 15 years in the center of a fragile neighborhood. So this is about transforming this community, starting with the school and building new housing to add capacity to that community. And this will be operating on the same principles we've used in New Orleans, where every project is a living building. And we hope to break ground on this next month. Now I want to close with this project. What I have concluded is that I need to take a bigger role in being the change I wish to see. And so in this case, what I should point out is my home is just out of sight above this image. So for the first time, I am wearing three hats. One is the neighbor, it can't be NIMBY, so it's something related. It's a new term that would relate to that, and it is my front yard, not my backyard. And so these two schools have just been put on the sales block by the Kansas City, Missouri School District. And so we're looking at, I've created a little development company. We currently have 3 schools underway that are much smaller than these and not so aspirational. But the intention is to transform these schools into living, learning communities and to use these regenerative principles in so doing. So when we look at them, the building on the left, and my home is right there, the building on the left was designed and built as a middle school, and on the right, a high school. So we, on the left, are repositioning that building as the Institute for Community. And I'll show you some of the activities in the school, but you can see we're putting 9 not-for-profits in that facility that have existed from 2 years to 30 years, who are all about increasing the beauty, vitality, and the human capacity of our community. And so this is locating them all in the same place to help a community of residents that we hope are like, perfect world. I'd have most of you living there. But I will have like-minded people, I hope, who will choose to live there and be transformational agents for the community in which we're located. So I see this as a healthy virus that will ultimately infect and change the rest of Kansas City and eventually the heartland. The larger building on the right, the high school, is to become the Center for Creativity and Innovation. And it includes a pilot public school, a pilot graduate school, it includes a business incubator, and it includes a series of existing programs in our community that are now joining together to transform themselves in this location. You can see some of the sports fields are continuing to be health and exercise facilities, and some are converted to urban agriculture. So this is the high school standing on the roof of the middle school, which will become the Sunset Grill, according to Libby, my wife. It'll be a green roof and a grill. So it's, again, not just about the facilities, but the neighborhoods around them. And in this case, looking at the entire 4 neighborhoods that surround these 2 schools as a place for edible landscape, both edible forest and productive lawns, and showing them how to do that with this facility. Cultivate Kansas City already exists. They're one of our partners on this project, and they've been doing extraordinary work already. But for them, it's stepping up to the point of showing that this could be a closed loop like nature, and having all the waste from this entire community become nutrients for that operation. And having a culinary institute taught by some of the best chefs in our region that are harvesting food 100 steps from where they're preparing it and 20 steps from where the community is enjoying it, and teaching others how to do the same thing. I mentioned the pilot public school. I'll just choose to mention this. These are a part of a class of at-risk high school students who 2 years ago designed and built this car, the most efficient electric car on the planet by a factor of 3. And we designed and built it, 20 of them, 20 mentors in 1 year. So this community is about creating the capacity for anyone to do that, not just these 20 lucky students, and creating a system that can replicate that pattern. So it also includes a business incubator. So this year, that organization is called Mind Drive, which is, I chair their board. And this year, we have a business model. So we're going to spin off. The students this year will own a company that makes small electric town cars and sells them to people in our community. Live, work, housing in this repurposed space. An eco-concierge to help people understand their options in living in this kind of community that they've never seen before. A Heartland Center for Creative Expression, because we think art and expression and collaboration is a key part of this journey. And in the end, we believe we can create a new benchmark within our region for living appropriately and creatively and a healthy life, both for ourselves and the landscape and community that surround us moving forward, by all of us embracing this together as a collaborative dialogue of discovery. We will soon be launching this site, which we're calling Revive, or Vive for Life, and we hope to have all of you in the dialogue with us and start expanding this conversation so that you are all becoming designers and drivers of this new future that we think can be created in the not too distant future. And so I think I'm done with 3 minutes to spare. I can't believe it myself. Thank you.